it's absolutely critical that the farming family community remains together, resilient and vibrant. And that's not going to happen unless it's not only profitable, but also that there's something there for the next generation to get hold of. And it's a great place to live in the country, but we still have to provide something for that next generation. Otherwise, they won't go there. And I think a big part of it is not just looking insular of what's happening on our family farm. It's kind of lifting the eyes up and seeing what's happening at a bigger picture. How are we involved in that? How can we be more involved in that? How can there be more value creation? How can we be more collaborative versus everyone is an enemy? The neighbour's an enemy because I'm competing at the sale yard, or the meat processor is an enemy because they're screwing me on price. I think we need to break down some of these barriers around collaboration and sharing. And I say that from a general perspective, but then I also say that from a very narrow perspective in AgriWebb, in the world we live in, which is through data creation and digitizing and being open to sharing for value add.
Welcome to the Profitable Farmer podcast, where we share stories and tips to help you run a better farming business and create your very own freedom farm. If you're looking to work smarter and not harder in your farm business, welcome. You're in the right place.
G'day everyone, welcome back to Profitable Farmer. In my last interview, it was great to connect with John Fargher and have him share his personal story and to reflect on the early days of what it took to get ag tech business AgriWebb off the ground. He was clear in his acknowledgement of the hatful of farmers that really helped them make this work and get the technology and the foundations of the business to where it was. And he acknowledged a few key team members that have contributed. For me, which speaks to just how authentic, genuine, and impressive both John is as a leader, but obviously the leaders and the values and the ethos that sits behind AgriWebb is compelling, and the foundations are set for scale up. So in this interview, let's expand on that and understand, where is AgriWebb today? What impact is it having on farming families? But more importantly, I think it's fascinating to start seeing how AgriWebb is collaborating and working with some key businesses in the agri supply chain to drive efficiency, to improve supply chains, and to see benefit arriving back to farming families where perhaps that hasn't been possible before. John, just before we get into this interview, I just want to acknowledge you and your business partners, Kevin and Justin's vision, the quality of your strategy, the intent of your leadership, but just your pioneering. It is genuinely amazing to hear what you're doing with Sainsbury and McDonald's and others to solve a supply chain problem for farming families. My next question was, would you mind describing the business model that you operate to? And I understand there's two sort of key pillars to that.
There is. So for those that may be familiar with AgriWebb, they're probably just familiar with one part of our business model, which is what we call our direct-to-farm business, right? Which is where I describe, 25% of all the animals in Australia on the platform. That's where farmers see our product, on board, and become a customer. That's our direct relationship. That was kind of that marketing-led into onboarding flow that I just described. We still have that business model in other countries, absolutely. But we also have our enterprise business model. And this here is where we engage corporations in and around the value chain, in and around the supply chain, and we unlock value for them, and we also unlock value for the farmer. And we don't necessarily go and build a whole bunch of bespoke software tools for those enterprises, and I'll explain a bit of detail of that. We're unlocking insights and data. insights to data. And it gets back to what I described at the very start of founding AgriWebb was get on many farms as possible, digitize as many animals as possible, and then unlock value through data. And that's our enterprise business model.
What's an example of that, John?
Yeah, I'll give the example. But what it does is do two things. Value creation through data, right? And I keep saying data and data because I spend too much time in the US. But it also delivers a distribution model. It delivers a distribution model at scale versus a one-on-one relationship with that farmer. So they're the two key pillars. Now, the first example of that was our supply chain offering, which we acquired through this business in 2018, right? We acquired this functionality and capability, which is now what we call our supply chain manager. And this is basically a software module that sits on top of the farm software, and it gets deployed in integrated traceable supply chains. So a key example of that is we're now 6 years into a very successful partnership with Sainsbury's and ABP. Now, Sainsbury's, for folk that don't know, is effectively the Coles and Woolies, right, of Australia, one of the large grocers over there. And ABP is one of Europe's largest meat processors. So they are what we call our enterprise client, and they have a integrated beef. It's actually a beef on dairy supply chain. So it's beef genetics into the dairy cow. The calf comes off day zero out of the dairy, but it's got beef genetics, and that animal then gets grown out to finishing and then gets processed. Something like 56% of the beef in the UK that gets consumed is beef on dairy, half, half beef, right? So that's just a realization that a lot of people don't know, but it's actually a really great success story in its own right, because what used to be a waste animal, right, the potty dairy calf, was a waste animal, and now it's a high performing product where they're actually optimizing the eating quality is actually as good, if not better, than beef on beef. So, I mean, and that's another story in itself, the rise of beef on dairy globally. But that supply chain now, we're on over 500 farms in two segments. It's kind of the rearing facility where the calves go through the rearing stage. They then go off onto grass finished farms where they get finished and go into meat processing. So our software is tracking those animals all the way from genetics, day zero, through each individual independent farming business. And they are using our software to optimize their own farming business, but we're taking the data up a layer higher to optimize that supply chain. And what we're doing now is pretty amazing results. I mean, it's pretty prescribed, right? These are the genetics that come in. This is a software that's going to be used. The users have to enter on those finishing farms a minimum number of weights. All the data is very prescribed of what needs to happen so that we have a very uniform article of what's coming through, and we bring the carcass data back as well. And so now the outcomes of that are, we've taken the average age of slaughter from 23, 24 months down to 18. So we're getting those animals to put on weight much faster, much more efficient. The farmers get paid for performance, right? So they're incentivized to do better, to use the data in AgriWebb to make better decisions. And Sainsbury's is also now able to, with this data and other data sets, able to make emissions reductions claims on the packet of high value steak that goes on the supermarket shelf over that age reduction, right? Because we've gone from an age of 23 or 4 months to 18 or 19 months. And that 5 months is an absolute emissions reductions because that animal's lived 5 months less. So some really unbelievable outcomes that are coming out of that supply chain. And it's unlocking data sharing where everybody's winning. The farmer gets paid more. The supply chain is more efficient.
Sainsbury are requiring their producers to be on the platform. Those benefits that you mentioned are pretty clear. Does it solve for the traceability question as well?
Yeah, we can track those animals the whole way back, which farm, because basically these individual animals in AgriWebb come in at day zero, and we transfer that animal and its history through the farms all the way to slaughter.
And the carbon saving that you mentioned, is that a benefit back to the farmer?
They carbon benefit because it's nothing to do with soil carbon, to be clear. It's emissions reductions, right? It's emissions reductions. So the farmer's not getting paid, call it an inset credit for that. They are getting paid a value add for that animal. So they get paid a premium outside of what they could get on another supply chain to participate in this.
Amazing.
So that's one example.
But have you got another one? I'd love to hear another one if that's okay.
So I'll give the example of what's happening and also from a business model perspective. So from that business model perspective, our customer, the user of the software is still the farmer, right? But they don't pay the bill, right? Sainsbury's and ABP fund all of the software and the services in our effort, and it just gets deployed. And so it now gets deployed across all of those farms, and our customer that's paying the bills is now Sainsbury's or ABP, and we're delivering them more value and more insights that they couldn't get before in an analog business model. And so again, everybody's winning. And I won't disclose the efficiency numbers that the supply chain participants are getting, but it's very meaningful. It's very meaningful in the amounts that they're saving through procurement efficiencies. And of course, they can back up their claims on, we have a traceable supply chain, we know what's going on. So it's a great example of where we could get to and how these supply chains can scale. Now, I understand, I'm going to flip into some other examples. I understand in a commodity-based environment where there is no traceability or a lack of traceability, it's challenging to do that. So no better place to talk about than the US. In the US, we work in our enterprise, we still work direct to farms, to ranchers over there. But in our enterprise business, we have similar supply chains, right, that I just described to Sainsbury's, some that are feeding into the Walmarts of the world. But where AgriWebb is unique and different is our software platform focuses on grazing, right? Cow-calf backgrounder, stocker, breeders. We do not go into feed yards. We've made a very deliberate play there. The US, 10 times the size of the Aussie market in terms of number of head of cattle, although they're at the lowest herd level ever. So they've got some challenges as well. But let's just round numbers, right? 10 times the size of the Aussie market. And 90% of the animals go through a feed yard supply chain. So grass finish is not really a thing in the US, where obviously in the UK and Australia, there's a good chunk of grass finished animals. Everything's got to be corn fed because that's what the market wants, and that's just how it's designed. So there's 750,000 cow-calf ranches in the US, 750,000, right? But the average herd size is 30 to 40. So what you've got is hobby farmers. They have 30 or 40 mama cows out there, but they've got a job in town, right? They're an accountant or whatever. They've got another job, but they've got some cows. So it creates this commoditized, highly fragmented market where the animals that fill this supply chain are coming off 750,000 cow-calf ranches, and each animal would change hands on average 4 to 5 times by the time it gets to the meat processor. It'll go transfer farm to farm like it does here in Australia. It'll then go to a sale barn, which is like a sale yard is what we have here. It'll then go to, maybe a stocker or a backgrounder, but it'll hit a feed yard every time. And then the feed yards are pretty well-oiled machines. Talking about running a farm or running a business, they're running a business. Make no mistake, right? Make no mistake. And they have to, right? Animal in, buy, weight, cost, done. So, and marketing is very sophisticated operations, and they have software, right? There's software offerings that deal with that. So that's why we're not playing in that space. So and the reason I'm telling this story is because that's how we had to navigate through that market. But also when we think about our enterprise supply chain, in limited examples where it's a grass finished supply chain, absolutely we can roll that same solution out. But where it's going through a feed yard, we have to look at it in segments. So in these supply chain environments, we would still operate in the grazing segment. We would capture all the data in that segment, and then we would either integrate with the feed yard software, or we'd take the data out of AgriWebb, the data out of the feed yard software. We'd then have a data strategy that pulls that together and drives the supply chain insights. So we have a different technical approach of how we deal with that there, but the concepts are still the same, right? Work directly with that supply chain owner or operator, deploy and get the value add. The other example I want to touch on, which I think is really exciting, is around our sustainability offerings. And when we think about sustainability, I believe it's very much in line with how the farming community thinks about sustainability, which is triple bottom line. It's environmental, right? It's social, and it's economic. It's those three components when we talk about sustainability. Often when you talk about sustainability, eyes will glaze over, and maybe there'll be some eyes glazing over on this session, because people immediately think about carbon. That's a component, but it's a small component. It's how are we driving more sustainable businesses and supply chain resiliency? How are we ensuring that beef will be there for future generations? And we are under pressure, right? Got to produce more from less land, commodities, droughts. Everyone knows what those scenarios are, particularly folk that would be listening to this. So the work we do over in the US is with large scale corporations that have commitments that they have made. These are voluntary commitments, to be fair. These are not compliance commitments. And I know in Australia there's some carbon reporting compliance regs that have come in 2025. In the US, they don't exist now, but it's voluntary. The large corporations out there have made commitments. Carbon emissions reductions, right? Water, biodiversity. They are making commitments to their shareholders. They are making commitments to their consumer customers because we need to do better. We need to do better in food production. We need to be more resilient and we need to be more sustainable. And when I say sustainable, I mean the whole picture. And so the appetite to do that in the US is unbelievable and really inspiring. And we have not seen that in Australia, to be really clear. Australia, we have our compliance hat on. I'm not spending any money. They need to do that. And everyone's pointing fingers. And I'll be very open and honest about that. But in the US, we have companies like McDonald's, Nestle, name your retailers, right? Wendy's on the burger side. Ahold Delhaize on the retail side. Burger King, Chipotle, meat processors, right? We have, particularly on the retail fast food side, enormous appetite to be investing very serious dollars, and I'm talking millions and millions of dollars, into making the supply chain more resilient. And even more pertinent is with ranchers, with the cow calfers, with the background, where the animals start, because that's where it's needed most, and that's where there's a lot of opportunity for improvement. And so we are building and structuring these program supply chain approaches where our customer, in fact, we did the first beef grazing scope 3 emissions reduction. Sounds like a lot, but let's just call it the first program with globally. We did it with McDonald's and another group over there called OSI, who's like their secondary meat processor, to invest in change management and call it interventions at the ranching level to help them be more productive. And also, in being more productive, will reduce emissions. So what I'm talking about here is animal emissions reductions. And in very simple terms, we're talking about being more productive, improving weaning rates, improving weight gain, reducing death loss, grazing management plans, right? Culling protocols, removing underperformers, focusing on high performers. Now, all of these things, everyone should be doing if you're running a sophisticated livestock operation. If you're running a business, you should be doing that. You're incentivized to do that. That's how you make money. But a lot of people aren't. They either don't have the know-how, they don't have the change management, they don't have the software and the data to help make those decisions. And that's what we bring. We are bringing this program level approach where AgriWebb is the software and the data platform that gets deployed on these ranches. We have a technical assistance partner that's, call it your sort of livestock agronomist. It could be the nutrients or the elders of the world that are sitting across the kitchen table with farmers on a very prescribed list of change management practices of what I just described. And then you've got a kind of reporting group that would basically take the data, do your baseline, show the improvements. Because at the end of the day, the corporations are reporting on emissions reductions. That's what's currently paying the bill. In time, it will, biodiversity and water and other areas will pay the bill. But make no mistake, right now, carbon is the currency that's driving change. But the thing I want everyone to take away here, for the first time ever, we've got groups at the other end of the supply chain, ranchers at the start, cow calfers, right, and McDonald's, retailers, fast food, that are investing directly on ranch to help them be better, to help them make more money. And what they're asking for in return is be more productive, prove it, show it, and we're going to claim those emissions reductions. And I've never seen anything which is quite so transformative. And there's no reason why a rancher would not want to participate. They get paid to participate, literally get a check. They get technical assistance. They get AgriWebb software for free. And there's no long-term contracts. This is not a 25-year contract. It's 1, 2, 3 year, 4 year contracts. There's no reason why you wouldn't want to do that if you want to be better. And I just think it's such a strong, powerful message. The other key piece of detail is it's not a supply chain. This rancher is not proving their meat, their ground meat ends up in a Big Mac. They can't because there's no supply chain. It is not possible, but they don't need to. It is a separate commodity. They're getting paid on emissions reductions. They can go and sell that cow to McDonald's competitors. In fact, they wouldn't even know. And that's the even better thing. It's not like, I'll pay you more money, Jeremy, if you sell me your cows. It's not that. The flexibility, the collaboration, and the vision for supply chain resiliency and how a rising tide can lift all boats. And if we, at the retail level at this big end of town, can invest and create more investment across that supply chain, A, that's what we're going to need to deliver on the macro goals of food production. And B, that's the way forward of creating an actual path forward to some of these challenges. And at the end of all of this, AgriWebb's role is helping the rancher and farmer be better, making data-driven decisions, and delivering that data, of course, secured and permissioned, to where it needs to get to add value to other participants. And that rounds out the strategy from 12 years ago that we designed. So that's the other work we're doing. And from that first program, which was McDonald's, we've now on 3 programs across the US, and it's pretty exciting. I mean, we're 2 years into this one program called Legacy Landscapes. The funders that we have at the table is Nestle, Purina, Wendy's, Ahold Delhaize, Burger King, and there's some others that are in the wind coming to participate. And currently, we're about on the recruitment of that. We've got about 40,000 head in the system, and this is year 2 of a multi-year engagement that we're looking to get up to 2030. So the impact is real. We're impacting hundreds of ranchers out.
It's an incredible insight, and thanks for sharing. And it's encouraging, isn't it, just to hear that those major players in supply chains investing so directly back in their producers. With the perspective that those advancements have provided you, what do you see next for Australian livestock producers? Do you see similar strategy and similar supply chain efficiencies and opportunities coming back into Australia and perhaps New Zealand? And with that too, the other question that I want to ask, John, is what innovations are next for AgriWebb with AI and everything that's coming up now? Keen just to hear what you're excited about into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. First part, what does it mean for Australia? We have been working desperately for a few years to get some of these programs into Australia. So we're hopeful that will eventuate. So it's absolutely real for Australia, taking those learnings and those programs, tailoring it to the Aussie market. So I'm very hopeful that we'll see some of that. And the beauty of it here in Australia from an AgriWebb context and a farming context is we have such a large customer base that we could bring into these programs to add value to them and give back to them. They get paid to participate. They could do better. So I would love to be able to offer these programs up to our customer base and bring them something new of value. I would really love to do that. So I'm hopeful. We have a few, and that's being led by the multinationals. That's being led by some of the groups I've mentioned, being like we're global. We've got a lot of offtake out of Australia and also got a lot of consumption in Australia. What can we do in Australia? The Aussie companies, just to be clear and I wouldn't say controversial, but I'll tell it for what it is. I have not seen real appetite outside of talking about it to actually invest side by side their industry participants to do better. I have not seen it. We have talked about it for a long time, but the appetite to invest is not there. The head is in the sand and it's compliance driven. If I have to do it, I'll do it. The least amount of money I need to invest to get the report that I need to submit, but I'm not in it for supply chain resiliency and how we're securing the future. I hope that'll change. Everyone would know who I'm talking about here, but they're not doing it, even if they say they are. And it's happening elsewhere. So that I hope will change as well. And I think over time, when we see the multinationals come in and they start knocking on the door of their suppliers, it will trickle down because it'll be like, this is what we require. If you want to supply to us, you're investing with me. And that's what we're seeing in the US. So I think the model will come, which is going to be interesting and exciting. And I want to be in the thick of it. And I also want to be sitting on the fence watching how that plays out. So I think that's where we're at on the Aussie context. I think, what's next? AI is absolutely transforming and changing the way everyone kind of, runs their business. And I think at a macro level, just outside of technology, I think it's a really positive for the ag industry, and let's call it blue collar industry if we want, because there's a lot of white collar jobs out there that are at risk. And I'm not a doomsday person. I don't see this whole world collapsing, but naturally there will be administrative tasks that will get taken over, right? You can't deny that that's happening now. But people still need builders and plumbers and electricians and people raising animals and food production. So getting back to how we started this of appetite for people to get in the industry, I think it's even more compelling now with what we're seeing from an AI perspective to get into this industry. So I'm excited by that. I'm also excited by, I deeply believe from an AI side that sort of moved along this version of, we don't, less people, less services. We don't want, like the great offering you guys provide. I think we're going to see more of that. And I think we're going to see more weight on people valuing that, because people still want the people connection and they just don't want it all be taken out by a bot. But I think it's going to be higher value connection. It's higher value insights, higher value relationships, higher value expertise that people are going to want, because the administrative tasks can be done elsewhere. So I don't want people to do that, but I want people working on the high value stuff. So I think that's going to happen. I think it's going to happen in our industry. So I think services is a very interesting part of the sector. That's just my personal view. For AgriWebb, like all technologies, like we've been working on machine learning for years, right? It's not a new thing for us. And one particular example is we've got this very large R&D project through Food Agility called Forage. We're in the final years of that now, but it's a large scale collaboration, multiple universities, MLAs in there, other technology companies out there that everyone's aware of, SIBO Labs, etc. And we're creating some really powerful IP out of that. And the outcomes are things like weight forecasting, right? Based off weight records, the data we have, other data sets, and putting some AI modeling in there, forecasting weights, right? Forecasting pasture growth rates, forecasting events associated to weather. And this all then gets back to our planning capabilities. It's a big part of what we're doing now in our future roadmap, which is, here's your operational plan. Here's your grazing plan. Here's your enterprise, beef enterprise, sheep enterprise, wool enterprise. This is what we're planning for the year. This is what's forecast to happen through some of the insights that we're delivering. And now how are you tracking against that? And being able to stress test that with scenario analysis, the what ifs, right? The what ifs, and then being able to make decisions much sooner. That's what we're working on. We've got that capability, some of that capability now, and that's the future of this. And this gets back to the last decade of the transition of the needs and the value proposition. Day one I mentioned was, where are my animals? I want to see it on a map. That's the now. Where are my animals? What's happening right now? It then led to compliance. We talked a bit about this in the UK, but it became a big part of Australia as well. I'm getting LPA audit. They're going to rock up my doorstep. It's very stressful. So then it was, I want to look backwards. I need report capabilities. I want to be able to do my stock recs and report backwards. And now those two things are table stakes. That's just a given. You should know what's happening now. You should be able to report back. The direction now is we're looking what's happening in advance, what's happening looking forward. And that starts with planning. Build out the plan, and you have this capability in AgriWebb. Build out the plan. We can then build some forecasting and insights over the top of that, and leveraging some of the AI capabilities to show what may or may not happen and make decisions off that. I think that's super exciting. I think this is not looking backwards of, this is what we did because grandpa did it and nothing might rain today. This is pretty sophisticated, forward-looking, forecasting, decision-making, drought resilience, optimizing performance opportunities.
Just to start rounding out, I just want to acknowledge the work that and the leadership that you and Justin and Kevin have pursued with massive intent over the last 12 plus years, from that notebook that goes through the washing machine and data gets lost to what you've just described. For me, it must be if not the one of Australia's greatest ag tech pursuits or success stories, definitely inside agriculture, but probably beyond. I hope it's something that the three of you do pause and reflect on as mates and celebrate. Congratulations to you and your team for what you've created and for the impact you are having on supply chains locally and globally. It's incredible, and we've only just touched on it. But I do just want to acknowledge your pioneering and your determination, your clear passion, and no doubt the persistence that the three of you and I guess the key leaders within your business have pursued to make it happen.
Well, that's very kind of you. I appreciate that. Very kind words, and I think we are proud of what we've managed to achieve. We wouldn't be here without our customers. We wouldn't be here without our team. And I think it is the resiliency, the tenacity, the persistence, and that farming's all about. And we've obviously just taken some of that into a technology business that happens to be in farming. But I think the exciting thing is it's not over, right? There's many more steps in the journey. There's many more chapters of this story. And I feel privileged to be able to share this story with you, Jeremy, and obviously your base. And it's great to be able to kind of share and reflect on it, and then also talk about the future and what's coming next. So thank you.
Pleasure, John. Just one final comment, if I could. What's your view on the importance of family farming in Australia and overseas? And what's your comment to perhaps some of those more traditional families that are yet to really lean in and embrace the sort of technologies that you're pioneering?
Yeah, I mean, I think the family farming is the fabric, it is the makeup of Australia, it is the makeup of globally where food is produced. And it's not just about the food production, fiber production for the population, right? It's those communities, those farming businesses drive the social and economic fabric of those communities. Even in our family, like our family business, as I mentioned, when I grew up, there were lots of people in the area. We had a governess, we had a few jackaroos, we had backpackers, but every property had that. So the local pub, the Blinden pub on a Friday night was booming with energy with these young people. And like that just doesn't exist anymore. And that's happened over a lot of years. But naturally, it's harder to get people in community and in region. And so it's absolutely critical that the farming family community remains together, resilient and vibrant. And that's not going to happen unless it's not only profitable, but also that there's something there for the next generation to get hold of. And it's a great place to live in the country, but we still have to provide something for that next generation. Otherwise, they won't go there. And I think a big part of it is not just looking insular of what's happening on our family farm. It's kind of lifting the eyes up and seeing what's happening at a bigger picture. How are we involved in that? How can we be more involved in that? How can there be more value creation? How can we be more collaborative versus everyone is an enemy? The neighbour's an enemy because I'm competing at the sale yard, or the meat processor is an enemy because they're screwing me on price. I think we need to break down some of these barriers around collaboration and sharing. And I say that from a general perspective, but then I also say that from a very narrow perspective in AgriWebb, in the world we live in, which is through data creation and digitizing and being open to sharing for value add. And so I guess that then kind of, answers the next piece around that side of things. I mean, how can we encourage the laggards, the next generation, the technophobes, whatever you want to call it. I don't think it's about technology. I think it's a mindset. I mean, you hear this, the average age of the farmer is 58 or 60. It is in every country. It's not just here. And that's true, but it's not an excuse. I mean, we have lots of customers that are 70 years old that are power users, right? It's a mindset. And yes, I know there's a barrier in I'm not familiar with technology. I'm not sitting in front of a computer. That's our job to make it simple and easy. That's our job, right? But we have to have a mindset, and we have to get over the change management barrier. And the final thing I would say is it's not getting easier out there. It's getting harder. And what I mean by that is there's no world where groups and supply chains and the ecosystem is going to want less information from you. They're going to want more. So do you want to have to deal with that stress in an analog way, or do you want to have it done once and being able to share that in a structured, permission, secure way and have control over that. And I believe it's fair enough that the industry wants more. What we've got to keep in mind is, as farmers, our role is feeding people. It's a very important role. And in a lot of cases, there's no transparency into what is actually happening in the products and the food that we consume. And if you think about it like that, it's pretty important that we have some level of control over that. So I understand you've got to be able to run your own business, but you have a pretty important role of delivering a food product, right? And so just when, if you're, as a consumer, when you want to buy something that's safe, that's of nutritional value. And so Australia is in a lot better position to be able to deliver that. At least we have some traceability and biosecurity. But like you look at the US, there is no traceability. There is no way of linking back from a food product perspective of where it came from. And that's pretty terrifying. You think about those 750,000 individual businesses, I have I have no view that they'd be out there in any ill intent. I'm a positive person. But at the end of the day, people can do whatever they want, and it ends up in the food supply chain. And we have seen catastrophic disasters in history. And so I think the summary here is you're going to have to do more, not less, when it comes to this stuff. So whether you like it or not, you're going to have to do it. And if you don't do it, not only will you be left behind, but you'll be missing out on value creation. And you'll also be missing out on the opportunities, which I mentioned, of driving more value in the community, right? And I think it's all part of it.
That's what I'm reflecting on as you speak, is that being amateur is now no longer an option. We've got to make that shift to professional. That's a non-negotiable, but let's not do it out of frustration to comply or to hand over data out of fear or whatever. Let's do it because in the doing of it, we get to participate in opportunities that don't exist for us right now that will be created for that collaborative approach of supply chains solving problems together.
Yep, absolutely. And the other thing is, we've talked a lot about supply chains. I don't want to give the impression that we're just talking about a meat supply chain here. We're talking about financing, where you're getting your money from. We're talking about where you're getting your inputs from, right? These are the key fundamentals of how you actually run your farming business. For all of these components, there is more value creation to be gained from that. And these businesses are looking at that. These sectors are looking at that. There will be opportunities to get better financing arrangements if you do certain things and participate and help everyone out, right? There will be more opportunities in the ecosystem that exists in and around you. And if you're not open and looking at that, like I think it's going to be a big challenge. And you could say that over the decades, oh, well, it's always been a big challenge. But what we're seeing now is the rate of change is faster. And you only need to look at AI of how things are happening so fast. And I do believe that we need to get our skates on. And we also need to get our skates on from an Australian perspective. When we look at what's happening globally and we look at, as I said, we've got operations in Brazil, and I've just never seen so much productivity. That's a whole nother session. I'm about to go to Argentina and Brazil in May. I've never seen the horsepower that's sitting there, which is exciting for them and exciting for food production. But if we're looking at a competitive landscape, like we need to get on with it. We need to get on with it.
I reckon you're right. There's a few more conversations we need to have. Thank you for your openness. Thank you just for all that you've achieved. Congratulations. And yeah, really appreciate your time, John.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Jeremy.
And there you have it, ladies and gents, an extended conversation with John Fargher, founder AgriWebb. An amazing story when you think about 14 years ago, or at less, 12 years ago, AgriWebb didn't exist, and now it's making a major impact on supply chains in agriculture globally, but just supporting many tens of thousands of farming families be more professional and be able to make decisions based on better information and better record keeping. John, really appreciated your openness, your reflection, but also just giving us an insight into how you think, how your team does business, how you focus on opportunity and growth, and the brilliance of the business model that has allowed AgriWebb to expand to the level that it is. We look forward to checking in with you again down the track and continuing to hear more about the AgriWebb story and where it's off to. I hope you've all enjoyed that interview over 2 parts with John just as much as I have. I just hope that we've done the AgriWebb story at least a little bit of justice. Thanks, everyone. Take care, and bye for now.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Profitable Farmer podcast by Farm Owners Academy. If you're new to this show, be sure to follow us. If you've been a long-time listener, let your friends know about us or come continue the conversation in the Profitable Farmer Facebook group. All the best as you grow your business and create your freedom farm. Until next time, keep being incredible.